If you're watching this right now, then you may have just heard the news that Landon Cassill has signed on to drive for Colleague Racing. I know a lot of people may not know the full story of how we got to this point, and may be wondering, who is Landon Cassill? Well, I'm here to do my best to explain this to you, and explain why this opportunity may have been a long time coming. I feel there is no one more qualified to speak on the subject than I am, so let's get started. Landon Cassill has been racing since the age of 3 years old. Starting with quads, he then moved up to go-karts. Landon won 4 International Kart Federation championships on both dirt and asphalt. He also won multiple state championships at the Newton Kart Club in 2000 and 2001. In 2003, the family decided it was time to move up to late models. Landon started racing in the ASA Late Model Series while he was still in high school. He would often come home from lunch and work on his race cars or just eat lunch with his race cars. At the age of 16, he won his first ASA late model race and became the youngest winner in the series history. Well, that was until Eric Jones broke that record 3 years later. Landon tore up the late model scene, and he became one of the top talents in the ASA late models. And that was just what NASCAR teams were looking for at the time. In 2006, Landon was a part of the GM Racing Development Competition. He was one of 16 drivers competing on a multitude of tracks and on a multitude of racing disciples. He was receiving calls from multiple NASCAR teams like Joe Gibbs Racing and Hendrick Motorsports. Ultimately, he decided to sign with Hendrick, and his NASCAR career was underway. Landon's NASCAR career started out with testing, and frankly that's what he did for a lot of his early career. He tested the car of tomorrow, and he worked with the team's research and development program, and did practices for the Hendrick pit crew. He tested for Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson and learned their driving styles and learned how they liked their car set up. When he turned 18, he was finally old enough to make his NASCAR debut.
Mike, Landon Cassill became age eligible to race in NASCAR just 14 days ago when he turned 18. Hendrick Motorsports had tabbed him to run a number of races in 2007 if he made a good showing at last fall's General Motors Combine of sorts, between short tracks, dirt tracks, and even a super speedway and a Busch Series car. Landon showed very well. In fact, he'd never raced on dirt before, and that was one of the challenges laid to the drivers. He did very well in a dirt late model, showed a lot of throttle and car control, and Hendrick knew that they might have a gem in young Landon Cassill. He'll start way up in the field tonight. We'll see if the 24 car can stay there all night long. Doc?
He made it at Gateway. He had a very strong run going before being wrecked by a lap-down Travis Kittleson while he was running in the 5th spot. He ended up finishing 32nd. He made 5 more starts in 2007, all of which didn't go so well. The only other highlight was he was running in 10th place on the last lap at Memphis before he got spun out. He had a best start of 6th at Gateway and a best finish of 18th at Dover, but there was plenty more to come in 2008.
Awful proud of you, but how in the world did you get from 23rd all the way up to 3rd?
I don't know. I mean, we just worked really hard on the truck and passed a lot of people all day, and the truck was nice and free, so I could get to the bottom and just roll by people, and just really happy for GoDaddy.com, really happy for Morgan Dollar Racing, and it was a good night.
Absolutely, and just his 5th career start, another top 10 for Landon Cassill. Double A.
Landon made his first of 19 nationwide starts in 2008 at Nashville. His first 5 starts, all average finishes in the low 20s with the best finish of 19th. In the second Nashville race, he scored his first nationwide top 10, finishing 9th. In the race, he made contact with Bobby Hamilton Jr., which cut Hamilton's tire and put him out of the race. 2 races later, Landon scored his first career pole at New Hampshire, but the team found a problem in the engine, and they changed it just to be safe. So he didn't get to keep a starting spot and had to drop to the back. While working his way up through the field, he passed Bobby Hamilton Jr., and in the very next corner, Hamilton repaid Landon for the contact at Nashville. Landon would rally back in the next 3 races, scoring top 10s in all 3 at Chicago, Gateway, and IRP. Landon was also making some truck and ARCA starts as well in 2008. He drove for Randy Moss Motorsports and bringing the sponsor GoDaddy into the sport for the first time. Landon had an average finish of 12.7 in his 7 truck starts. Back on the nationwide side, Landon was starting to get more comfortable in the car and was really feeling like he was getting the hang of it after jumping straight up from late models. Landon finished 2008 with a 6th place run at Phoenix, and things were just getting good. He actually won Rookie of the Year over Brian Clausen. He he and Junior Motorsports had big plans for 2009. Landon was slated to get a full season at Junior Motorsports. They had the National Guard as a sponsor all lined up, and then the recession happened around 2008, and so they had to move over to cover the lost sponsorship of Jeff Gordon. So Klondike became Landon's primary sponsor for 2009, until Brad Keselowski lost the Navy sponsorship for his car, and they jumped over there. So Landon was left rideless. But he wasn't done driving. Landon continued to test for Jimmy Johnson and Hendrick Motorsports, something he would continue to do until the 2011 season. But as for racing in NASCAR's divisions, that is something he only got to do once in the whole calendar year. He made a one-off start for James Finch at Memphis in the Nationwide Series. He qualified 14th and finished 10th, doing what he could to make the most of his one chance. He did win another championship ring with Jimmy as his test driver, but more in-race action would have to wait until 2010. "2010 proved to be an absolutely insane year for Landon. He started the first race of the year at Daytona in a Thor Sport truck before a crash on the first lap collected him and he finished last. That was his only truck start of the year. Landon made 6 nationwide starts that season, 3 of which were for Junior Motorsports in the 7 car. He only mustered a best finish of 18th at Texas in those. He was collected in incidents in the other 2. He also made 3 starts for RAB Racing. The first 2 races at Chicago and Gateway, they parked after 100 laps due to a vibration. The team ran the whole last race at Richmond, and they finished 28th. So you'd think, wow, that's all for 2010, right? Well, no. Landon received a call from James Finch 15 weeks into the season. His team was a start and park team, and they had been missing races. He couldn't afford that, and he needed a driver to get...
I'm here with Landon Cassill, who is attempting to make his very first Sprint Cup Series start. And Landon, no matter how many races you run, you can never replace the first one if you can step this thing up and get it in on qualifying.
Yeah, that's the goal today. I just really excited to be here, really thankful of James Finch and Phoenix Racing for giving me the opportunity. We got a great Hendrick engine under the hood. And, in practice, I was happy with how we unloaded, and we were pretty fast, but we just didn't get faster as practice went on. So we made some adjustments, and we know what we got to do. We were a little loose off, and I wasn't able to commit to the gas. So we know what we got to do. I just got to go man up and do it. So this is a good place to qualify.
Now, we know you're still pretty much under the Hendrick Motorsports banner. What seems to be in the future for Landon Cassill? Maybe more attempts in this 09 car?
Hopefully, if I do well enough, they'll ask me to do it again. So I've been doing a lot of testing for Hendrick Motorsports. I really appreciate them trusting me with their race cars, and that's really what has gotten me this ride. So, the testing has been big for me, and then obviously some nationwide races that I've been doing this year, and just trying to stay in the seat as much as possible, and just extremely blessed to be at a Sprint Cup Series race.
Well, guys,
Landon isn't sure if Rick Hendrick helped him make this deal, but I'd like to think that he did. Landon made the show at Michigan in his first career Cup start. He qualified 35th and finished 38th, parking after 51 laps. Landon would go on to make 15 more starts in 2010. All except one he parked. He only missed the show twice, once at Atlanta for James Finch and once at Talladega in Larry Gunzelman's car. He made starts for Finch, TRG, and Gunzelman that season. The only race he completed for TRG all the way through, at Richmond, they finished 33rd. Landon was not paid for the 5 starts he made with them. But this season made Landon known as a great qualifier. He could get your car in the show almost every time. Things were finally looking up after making just one start in 2009. He made 23 in 2010, and 2011 was looking to be much better. In 2011, Landon made one Xfinity start, but boy, it may be the best race of his whole career. Landon was driving for James Finch at Daytona. Finch always tried to put a winning piece on the track for plate races, and 2011 was no exception. Landon qualified outside pole, only being knocked off pole by the last driver. He struggled to start the race, though, as he was trying to learn the 2-car tandem package. But as the race progressed, he worked his way up front. On the last restart, he worked his way up to 3rd, being pushed by Tony Stewart. They had to swap because he was overheating, and Landon had struggled most of the race being the pusher. He ended up getting Tony back to the lead pack, and, well, you'll see.
Back to the battle up front. White flag is out. Here we go. Who's going to win it at Daytona?
We see Reed.
Oh, look out.
Okay,
look out. Into the wall. He caroms off. Everybody else gets by. He'll go back into the wall. The white flag's still out. No caution on the
racing that into turn 3. Junior's right on the bumper. Clint Boyer.
Does he make history? Dale Earnhardt Jr. or does Clint Boyer win? And here comes Tony Stewart. He's getting the push from Cassill. Coming out of 4. This is really going to be close.
Here goes Junior to the inside.
Junior to the inside. Boyer takes the lead and pulls on and at the stripe. It's Boyer. Stewart.
That was pretty cool. He actually left Daytona with the driver's point lead in the Nationwide Series, but he didn't make another start the whole season in the Nationwide Series. On the Cup side, Landon was starting parking for Journeyman Racing in the number 60 Big Red Toyota. After the third race, Landon got another call from James Finch. He wanted Landon to drive his Cup car again. But this was going to be different. There wasn't going to be much starting parking this season. Landon was going to get to go to the full distance in the majority of the races. He finished 24th in his first start at Auto Club. When we got to Talladega, Finch brought another rocket ship. Landon qualified 6th and was up front until a push gone wrong ended his day. The season was very mixed. There were both good days and bad days. He tore up a lot of equipment, but he also had some stellar runs. He had a season's best finish of 12th at Michigan and 9 top 25 finishes. In 2012, Landon wasn't retained at Finch, and he was replaced by the recently fired Kurt Busch. Landon was slated to run the Daytona 500 for Front Row Motorsports and start and park for them after that, but he was then approached by a newly formed team, BK Racing, to join them for their 2012 season. Landon signed on with BK Racing in their newly acquired fleet of cars from the defunct Red Bull Racing. The cars were pretty good and the on-track product showed it. Landon finished 22nd in his first Daytona 500, but it could have been much better. He was second when the infamous jet dryer incident happened, but the race did resume. The team struggled for the next 8 races, with the best finish of 29th in that span. But after that, the team started clicking. A 20th place finish at Richmond and 18th in the Coke 600 was great. And then, 2 of the worst races of his career happened.
Touch me, or if you didn't, when there's a car there, it gets you real loose. So, and I was already loose. But Tony's a super patient driver. He's one of the best. So, it's just too bad that it tore up that many race cars. I really hate it for my guys and all the other teams out here that got a long month of June ahead of us. So, but we'll just keep working hard, and we had a great run last week in Charlotte with the Burger King Toyota. So we'll keep working towards Pocono and Michigan.
We see Landon Cassill already sideways at that point. He comes across, gets into the 56. You see the 22 go down into 2 or 3 cars were collected in that, or got a piece of that. Landon Cassill appeared.
But they fought back. 18th at Michigan, which would have been even better, but the transmission was stuck in gear on the final restart. He qualified 9th at the second Michigan race as well, and he qualified 12th at the second Richmond race. He also got into a feud with Danica Patrick at Kansas, where we all learned the number 1 rule of stock car racing.
Well, rule number 1 of stock car racing is learn how to wreck someone without wrecking yourself.
If you're going to have paybacks or send a message, then you need to not wreck yourself.
But the team really started doing well the second half of the season. 13 top 25s and an average finish of 27.5. A new car was on the horizon and everyone was hopeful, until someone else had other ideas. Landon ended up suing BK Racing for not paying him for the fulfillment of his contract in 2012. The 2013 ride was held over his head, and he was never sure if he'd actually get to drive it. They settled out of court, and Landon was rideless very late into the 2013 silly season. He didn't get to race Daytona, but he did find himself a ride for Phoenix the next weekend. He was driving for Joe Falk in the 33 car. The plan was to start and park races, but that only ended up happening just a couple times. The team actually did well for their standards. Landon had a stellar run at Richmond, finishing on the lead lap in 25th, and then they finished 22nd the next week in a car that had no business being in the draft at Talladega. Another top 25 at Daytona, and then some changes started happening. At Auto Club earlier that season, Johnny Davis called Landon up, and his Nationwide car was in danger of missing the race. Landon got in the car, and he got the car in the show for Johnny, and Johnny didn't let that go unnoticed. The team signed him to drive their number 4 car for the rest of the season. It was more of a chance to get some reps in and show what he could do. He had a pretty good season, and he was definitely the best car at JD Motorsports. Back in Cup, Austin Dillon was slated to run Indianapolis in the 33, an RCR car, so Mike Hillman and Joe Falk put together another entry, the 40 car. Landon qualified his way into the Brickyard 400 and he finished 33rd. The team then started bringing the 40 to every race with Landon, and he would alternate which car he drove. The season ended with a whimper, but things were in the works for the 40 car in 2014. Landon went into Speed Week slated to drive the 40 car full-time for Mike Hillman Racing and the 01 car for JD Motorsports in the Nationwide Series. Hillman brought a rocket ship to Daytona, and they found sponsorship right before the Daytona duels, and they didn't even have time to finish wrapping the car. Landon achieved what he calls one of the best moments in his entire career by racing his way into the Daytona 500, essentially cementing that the team would be able to make the whole season. They then announced a huge sponsorship deal for the team with Nabi tablets. 18 races of sponsorship was a big deal for the team. Landon ended up wheeling his way to a 12th place finish in the Daytona 500, avoiding multiple wrecks and giving the team valuable points that they had no idea would be so important. In 2014, NASCAR introduced group qualifying, where you had 20 minutes to put down a fast lap. Landon had made his name with single lap knockout qualifying, and the change really hurt them in the next 2 races. Since the first 3 races went off of 2013 points, the 40 had to race in on speed. They didn't have the points, but they couldn't do it. They DNQ'd the next 2 races, but since they finished 14th in the Daytona 500, they were comfortable to make it for that 4th race. The season got back on track with the top 25 at Darlington, but there was bad news. The team didn't actually clear the Nabi tablet sponsorship with NASCAR, and Sprint didn't carry Nabi tablets, so NASCAR would not allow them to be on the car due to a conflict with Sprint. So the team had to try and make up for that lost funding. They found sponsors and cars for sale. The team was a huge threat at superspeedways. Landon finished 11th at Talladega. He qualified 3rd and led laps at Daytona before being caught up in the big one, and Landon finally managed to score his first career top 10 in Cup with a miraculous drive to 4th in the Talladega Fall Playoff race. The team was working well together, and they were constantly in the top 30 or top 25. Landon refused to take calls from other teams because they had a plan. On the Nationwide side, the 01 team was rolling. Landon was constantly running in the top 20 or top 15 and was running better than cars with double the funding of them, if not more. He was even in the top 10 in points for a little bit, and he was constantly making the 2nd round in qualifying, or 3rd even. Landon scored 3 top 10s, including 1 at his home track in Iowa, Road America, and Talladega. Ultimately, the lack of reliability killed them, but he had an amazing season with an average finish of 19.8. In 2015, Hillman Racing merged into Hillman Smith Motorsports. Hillman partnered with Gordon Smith to bring the team ECR engines and more resources, including better cars. This was the best position the team had been in. Landon had another stellar drive in his dual race, holding off and blocking Matt Kenseth on the high line to finish 9th. But that's when it all went to hell. 18 laps into the Daytona 500, Landon's race went up in flames. Then, the next week, it happened again less than 100 laps into the race. What a disaster. Nothing went right the first half of the season. The new cars were awful, they didn't handle well at all, and they were wrecked out early at Talladega. Nothing would go right. He did run up front at Daytona. They finished 13th before a massive crash past the flag killed their best car. When Darlington rolled around, it was still a disaster. Hillman and Gordon Smith had broken up, the team went back to Hillman Racing, and the team went to PME engines for the rest of the year. And in Nationwide, things really weren't too much better. Things weren't as smooth as the year before. There were more reliability problems, and struggles just plagued them. He did manage 2 top 10s and some strong runs at the short tracks, but 2015 was just too much. His average finish fell to 22.1. In the 2015 to 2016 offseason, Hillman Motorsports really didn't exist anymore. The charter system had killed them, so Landon was looking for a ride. Front Row finally managed to get their guy they had been wanting for years. Landon signed on to drive the 38 car with Chris Buescher as his teammate in the 34. He couldn't return to JD Motorsports because the Front Row ran Fords and JD ran Chevys. The season actually went pretty well to start. He brought over Snap Fitness from Hillman, and he was outrunning Buescher on a constant basis. He had a best finish of 11th at Talladega. He led a bunch of laps at Bristol and ran up front. The team was vibing really well. Then Chris Buescher won at Pocono. After that, his season really went downhill. While Buescher was trying to make the top 30 in points so he could qualify for the playoffs, Landon seemed to go right backwards. But it did end up being one of his best seasons of Cup with an average finish of 26.3, and he was all set to come back next season as the team's #1 driver. In 2017, Landon came back to Front Row as the lead car. He was ready to take on his new sponsor, Love's, and take them to new heights. But that's not what happened. Landon struggled to get back on track with Donnie Wingo as his crew chief all season. They made a change near the end, but it didn't really matter. A multitude of tire failures, crashes, bad luck, and just not running well spelled for a rough season. It seemed Front Row had given up on Landon, and they pretty much confirmed that by saying he wasn't returning near the end of the season. Once again, Landon would go into another season looking for a ride. Landon would once again miss the Daytona 500, but it wouldn't take long to find a ride. 6 races in, he was called by Angela Cope to drive the 00 car for Starcom Racing. Their previous driver, Jeffrey Earnhardt's sponsorship had fell through. Landon instantly made the team better, and they scored a 21st place finish at Texas and a 20th place finish at Bristol. Landon ran most of the rest of the races with Starcom. He did miss a few due to other drivers bringing in sponsorship, but Starcom even brought out a second car sometimes just to get him in the race. They seemed very happy to have him as their driver. He was very consistent and he wasn't tearing up equipment. Landon also ran a few more Xfinity Series races. Since he wasn't tied to a manufacturer, he could drive for JD again. JD's was kind of full, but Ross Chastain was kind of having some issues, so Landon got to drive a few races. He finished 14th at Darlington and 14th at Las Vegas for his old boss. Then he got to drive Carl Long's number 13 Zombie Dodge into the show at the Roval. And then at the last race of the season, he got to drive Morgan Shepherd's car. In 2019, Landon returned to Starcom on a 2-year deal. But once again, it seemed like there was the second season blues. They had multiple races where the car would have fuel pressure issues and they would knock them out of the race or behind the wall. Put them multiple laps down and any good finish was gone. It seemed to happen literally every week. It was kind of a point of contention in the team. But Landon kept plugging away, keeping the car in one piece. At Daytona, he missed a huge accident that put them in second place with threatening rain. But the team decided to pit, and the third place car behind them stayed out and won the race. That was essentially the story of the season. Once the fuel pressure issues got sorted out, they ran okay. But Landon kept the team out of the bottom 3 of owners' points, which would become huge in 2 or 3 years. Landon also ran some more Xfinity races for Johnny Davis. He scored top 10s at Talladega and Bristol, and was running in the top 10 at Darlington with some big names until Josh Williams spun in front of him and made contact. But Landon started qualifying Morgan Shepherd's Xfinity car so he could get him into some races. Morgan was struggling to get his car in the show, and he needed a driver. Johnny Davis said, "Why don't you hire Landon?" And that's what he did. Landon continually qualified that car up front, including a 9th place at Las Vegas in what Dale Jr. called a Hall of Fame qualifying run. Morgan had 1 car, 1 engine, and 2 people, I believe, that worked for him. And once again, Landon was making the most of the equipment. The last race of the season, Landon actually got to run the full race. He qualified 13th and finished 15th. During the 2019-2020 offseason, it was announced that Quinn Hoff would be running the 00 for Starcom the next season, which was news to Landon as he had a 2-year contract and he was going into the last year of that deal. For some reason, Starcom didn't know that, for whatever reason, so now they had 2 drivers to pay and only 1 car, and Landon was the odd man out, so he essentially got paid to try to look for another ride. Landon would continue to qualify Morgan Shepherd's car until the pandemic shut everything down. When it came back, the 8 and 9 couldn't even attempt to make the race because they were outside the owner's points. And regardless, even if the pandemic happened, it probably wouldn't have mattered because they were only getting a couple $1,000s since they were outside the top 36 in points, so it wasn't even worth it to enter. And that time, Landon went to iRacing and Twitch. He got sponsorship in Blue Emu, and they sponsored him for the iRacing Pro Invitational. Landon thrived against the Cup stars on iRacing, put on many events for himself during the year. He and Parker Kligerman even made their own company to put on big iRacing events called E-Racer. But that didn't really help him get a ride for the rest of the season. In 2021, Landon and Johnny Davis decided to get the band back together. Morgan Shepherd's team was forced to close, so Landon and Johnny were ready to replicate their success. Landon didn't bring any sponsorship to start, as usual. So many times throughout the season, they found themselves down a set of tires or two. But they did start the season strong. Landon was up front at Daytona in the Blue Emu car until the wreck with a few laps to go put him out of the race. He ran 12th at the Daytona Road Course, his first time there, and he was in playoff position through the first part of the season. He finished 12th at Darlington, 13th at Charlotte, and 15th at Texas. And he only had one finish outside the top 25 in the first 14 races, and that was a blown motor. But then, everything came crashing back down to earth. Reliability issues hit hard, with 4 of 6 races resulting in going behind the wall at some point. All season, Landon was switching points and car numbers to try to get the cars as high as they could in owner's points. But he alone couldn't save it. In the last race of the season, he DNQ'd his first ever Xfinity race. It wouldn't have happened if Harrison Burton attempted an actual lap at speed, but it was just a crappy ending to his time with Johnny Davis. It wasn't the way he wanted it to end between those two. He wanted to finish strong. But the biggest thing to happen in 2021 was him finding a sponsor. Voyager, a crypto brokerage app, signed on for the second half of the season with Landon. It was a big deal. Landon had a few sponsors throughout his entire career, but nothing like this. They were ready to make the jump, get Landon in a top-tier car for the first time. They believed in him, and that's where we are now. This is Landon's first shot in good equipment since 2009. This is his first ever full season in a top-tier equipment, with his car and his team. He's made himself known as someone who always gets the best out of his equipment. He can bring the car home in one piece, and normally run a few spots better. In 2019, he had the lowest crash rate of the entire NASCAR Cup Series. And in 2021, he had the lowest crash rate in the entire Xfinity Series. There have been ups and downs, for sure, but he's paid his dues. It's finally time to see what he can do in a good car. At Junior Motorsports, he was just a 16-year-old kid who'd been brought up from late models, and now he's a seasoned veteran. From my math, Landon has driven for 17 different teams across the years, and not with any particular team for more than 2 years straight. Hopefully he's found a home now. And I know I'm pretty biased, but you've seen my channel, my Twitter, hell, my arm has a castle on it. I'm proud to call him a friend, and hopefully this season we can all call him a winner, because I know he's capable of that.